Welcome to Life Stories, where we explore journeys of resilience, transformation, and the power of self-discovery. Today, we bring you the story of Abigail Thompson, a woman who defied her wealthy family's expectations to carve her own path in the world. Her journey from being the invisible daughter to becoming the president of a prestigious hotel chain is a tale of courage, perseverance, and personal growth. Join us as we follow Abigail's journey and uncover the profound lessons that life has taught her. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to start today's story. Abigail Thompson was born into a world of expectations. As the eldest daughter of a wealthy family in the Upper East Side of New York, she grew up in a home that epitomized luxury and success. Her father, Richard, ran one of the most respected investment advisory firms in the city, while her mother, Margaret, was the picture of elegance and high society, frequently hosting charity galas and social events. From the outside, the Thompsons had it all: a mansion adorned with priceless art, tailored suits, and an impeccable reputation. Abigail was raised to uphold these traditions, to fit into the mold her parents had so carefully crafted for her. But Abigail was different from the others. She never quite fit into the world her parents wanted her to inhabit. While many of her classmates at Harvard Business School went on to work for prestigious investment banks or major consulting firms, Abigail chose a path that was not only unconventional but also difficult for her family to understand. After graduation, she did not join the high-powered corporate world that her father had planned for her. Instead, she immersed herself in charity work, dedicating her time to running homeless shelters and supporting educational initiatives for children. She found solace in the simplicity of helping others, in the quiet moments spent with those who had little but taught her more about life than any business meeting ever could. Her decision to leave behind the glitzy world of wealth and status did not sit well with her family. Richard, her father, had always prided himself on the Lawrence family name, a name that was synonymous with business acumen and social standing. When Abigail chose to work in the charitable sector, he was furious. He called it a disgrace, something that sullied the family reputation. Her mother, Margaret, who spent her days attending gala events and wearing the finest brands, echoed her husband's disapproval. She could not understand why Abigail would forsake the comfort and status of their world for a life that seemed, to her, so humble and thankless. Even her younger sister, Emily, who was only 28, was a stark contrast to Abigail. Emily had everything that Abigail did not: the glamour, the luxury, the followers on social media, and the attention of everyone around her. She had climbed the corporate ladder swiftly, landing a vice president position at a prestigious investment bank while cultivating a perfectly curated image on Instagram. She was the family's shining star, admired by their friends, and had no qualms about living in the spotlight. Abigail, on the other hand, preferred the quiet comfort of modest clothing and simple living. She didn't care for luxury brands or the opinions of others. Her heart lay in something far deeper than status. Still, the disapproval of her family weighed heavily on her. She grew accustomed to their harsh words, their dismissive glances, and their attempts to convince her that she was wasting her potential. But in her heart, Abigail knew she was on the right path, even if it wasn't the one her family had envisioned for her. Her father's words often stung the most. "Uphold the Lawrence family tradition," he would say, his voice tinged with both pride and control. It was his mantra, the guiding principle that had shaped his entire life. To him, Abigail's choice to step away from the world of business and wealth was an unforgivable breach of tradition. The tension between Abigail and her family reached a boiling point during a family meeting 2 months before Emily's wedding. It was a moment Abigail had dreaded, a moment when she would once again be forced to confront the deep divide between her choices and their expectations. The family had gathered in the formal reception room of their home, a grand room with antique furniture and heavy velvet curtains. The fireplace, though unused for years, still stood as a symbol of tradition. Richard was seated in his usual place, at the head of the room, his fingers tightly gripping a glass of whiskey. Margaret sat beside him, impeccably made up and wearing a Chanel dress, her eyes flicking nervously between her husband and Abigail. Emily was there too, sitting primly, her hands folded in her lap, her perfectly manicured nails glinting in the light. "Abigail," Richard began, his voice firm and authoritative, "your charitable work is admirable. But it's no way to spend your life. It's a distraction. You could be doing so much more." Margaret nodded in agreement, adding, "How long will you keep this up?" "Dear, it's not practical." Emily, ever the supportive sister, scoffed and said with a smirk, "You'll lose followers if you keep this up." Abigail's heart sank as she listened to their words, the familiar sting of rejection filling her chest. They couldn't see the purpose behind her work, the fulfillment she found in serving others. To them, it was just a waste of time, a distraction from the real world of business and success. But there was something else Abigail had yet to share with her family, something that would change everything. For the past 10 years, while running homeless shelters and supporting education, Abigail had been quietly preparing for a new role. She had been in confidential talks with corporate executives and had been selected to become the president of Prestige Hotels. This decision had been made long before, but she had kept it a secret, knowing that the revelation would cause shockwaves through her family and the business world. The appointment was set to be officially announced 1 week after Emily's wedding. For Abigail, the last decade had been an intense, quiet preparation for this moment. It was not just charity work, it had been a deliberate and strategic learning experience. She had been working from the ground up, gaining insights into the hospitality industry, learning how to lead, and understanding the needs of both guests and employees. She had kept her secret carefully, maintaining casual conversations with her family about her so-called expansion of charitable activities, all the while knowing that a profound change was on the horizon. But as the day of Emily's wedding drew closer, Abigail found herself standing at a crossroads. How could she keep this secret any longer? How would she navigate the delicate balance between her family's expectations and the truth she was about to reveal? The tension in the air was palpable, and Abigail could feel it settling deep within her. Her family had no idea what was coming, but Abigail knew it would change everything. She had spent 10 years building this future, and it was finally time to step into the life she had worked so hard to create. The journey was only just beginning. The day of Emily's wedding arrived, and the atmosphere in the Thompson household was charged with excitement. For weeks, the family had been preparing for this event, an extravagant celebration that would cement Emily's place as the crown jewel of the family's social circle. Everything was meticulously planned, from the stunning Vera Wang wedding dress to the grand banquet at the Ritz, with its sparkling chandeliers and marble floors. The wedding would be a spectacle, a testament to the family's wealth and status. Abigail, however, felt like a stranger in her own family. As she made her way to the Ritz that morning, she could sense the heavy weight of expectation hanging over her. The day that was supposed to celebrate her sister's new beginning was, for Abigail, the final act in a carefully orchestrated plan. She had arrived at the hotel before anyone else, the cool breeze from the Charles River brushing against her face as she entered the historic building. The staff greeted her with the same professionalism they always did. But this time, their eyes held something more, a quiet recognition of the truth they had all been keeping. Abigail was the new president of Prestige Hotels, the very institution that was hosting her sister's wedding. None of the guests knew this yet. As the staff went about preparing the venue, Abigail could see their brief, knowing glances. It was as if the entire hotel was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when the secret would be revealed. The day passed slowly, with Abigail moving through the preparations in a detached haze. She gave orders for flower arrangements, checked the seating chart, and confirmed the final details with the caterers. She was treated as an invisible figure, a mere coordinator in a hotel that she would soon own. The staff, however, followed her instructions with remarkable precision, understanding the significance of the moment even if no one else did. She felt a deep sense of irony as she directed them, knowing that they were executing her vision while her own family treated her as an outsider. At 10 a.m., Emily arrived at the hotel, radiant in her pure white wedding dress. Her beauty was undeniable. But to Abigail, it felt like a mask, a perfect facade that hid the truth of her sister's world. Emily moved through the day with the grace of someone accustomed to being the center of attention, ordering Abigail around without a second thought. Their mother, Margaret, was already perfectly made up, wearing a lilac Oscar de la Renta dress. She directed Abigail with the same cold detachment she always had, treating her daughter as little more than an accessory to the event. Abigail stood in stark contrast to them. She wore a simple navy Brooks Brothers suit, her appearance humble against the opulence of the room. The reflection of the three women in the mirror told a story of its own: Abigail, the outsider, caught between the two worlds. As the guests began to arrive, the wedding's true nature became even clearer. The lobby of the Ritz filled with the finest brands, Chanel, Hermes, and Gucci, and the atmosphere was one of carefully cultivated perfection. Abigail was introduced to the guests as little more than a helper, a background figure who didn't belong in the spotlight. Her father, Richard, beamed with pride as he welcomed the guests, eager to talk about his daughter-in-law-to-be, James Wilson, the wealthy investment banker who would soon be part of their family. Abigail could feel the weight of her family's disdain, their subtle rejection of her choice to live a life that wasn't defined by luxury and appearances. She was invisible to them, a shadow in the background of their perfect day. When the ceremony was about to begin, Abigail stood near the staff entrance, waiting for it all to unfold. The church-like chapel, with its high ceilings and stained glass windows, was filled with the city's elite. Guests murmured in anticipation, their eyes gleaming with the excitement of being part of something so grand. Abigail, however, felt like a spectator in her own life. Her family, proud and self-assured, stood at the front, while she remained in the shadows, her heart heavy with the secret she had been carrying for so long. Then, something unexpected happened. As Abigail scanned the room, her eyes met the gaze of former President Harrison, an elderly man with impeccable posture who had been invited as a guest of Emily's soon-to-be father-in-law. Harrison was one of the few people in the room who knew the truth about Abigail's appointment. He had seen her dedication over the years, watched her work tirelessly in the background, and understood the significance of the role she was about to take on. As their eyes met, Harrison gave a slight nod, his face a mask of calm, but Abigail could see the flicker of recognition and respect in his eyes. It was a silent acknowledgement of what was about to happen, a moment of understanding between two people who knew the weight of the secret Abigail had been carrying. The ceremony began, and Abigail stood in silence, watching as her sister walked down the aisle, radiant in her designer dress. Emily was the picture of perfection, a life that seemed too beautiful, too flawless to be real. But Abigail knew better. Behind the perfect smile and the flawless wedding, there was a life defined by appearances. A life that, for all its luxury, lacked something far more important. As the vows were exchanged and the guests clapped, Abigail could feel the growing tension inside her. The day was almost over, and soon, her secret would be revealed. The irony of it all wasn't lost on her. Her family was celebrating Emily's new life, unaware that Abigail's own transformation was just beginning. The reception had begun in full swing, with champagne flowing and the sound of clinking glasses echoing through the grand ballroom. The atmosphere was one of exuberance, a celebration of Emily and James's union, a union that represented the epitome of everything the Thompson family valued: wealth, status, and social connection. Abigail sat at a staff table, discreetly placed away from the center of attention, watching the guests around her. Her mother was mingling with her society friends, her eyes flitting nervously between her husband and the guests, all the while maintaining the perfect facade of poise and control. Abigail's sister, Emily, was still in the spotlight, her phone constantly in hand as she snapped selfies and uploaded photos to her social media. She basked in the adoration of her followers, completely oblivious to the growing tension Abigail felt deep within her. Abigail had played her part in this charade, smiling politely when needed, issuing instructions to the staff with the kind of authority she had learned over the years. But inside, her emotions were a whirlwind. As the minutes ticked by, her thoughts kept returning to the moment she had been dreading, the moment when she would step out from the shadows and reveal her true identity to her family. The time had come. At precisely noon, former President Harrison, the esteemed gentleman who had long been a friend of the family, stood up. The guests, still absorbed in their own conversations, fell silent as he approached the podium. Harrison's presence was commanding, yet there was a calmness in his demeanor that conveyed something more. Abigail knew, as he stepped forward, that the moment had arrived. Harrison began to speak, his voice steady and warm, yet each word seemed to carry the weight of an unspoken truth. My friendship with James Wilson stretches over 50 years. Harrison began, his tone resonating through the ballroom. We've shared many memories together, memories that have shaped both our lives. But the true significance of this hotel, of this place, goes beyond the people who have walked its halls. This hotel is not just a building, it is a silent witness to history, a place that has seen the rise and fall of countless lives. Abigail's heart pounded in her chest. She knew this speech wasn't just about the hotel. It was a lead-up to something far more personal. Harrison's gaze swept the room, and for a brief moment, it lingered on Abigail. His eyes met hers, and she could see the barely contained emotion in them. His lips curled into a subtle, knowing smile. Abigail swallowed hard, bracing herself for the inevitable. Harrison continued, his voice growing stronger. Our industry is changing, he said. And with that change comes the need for new leadership. Leadership that embraces innovation while respecting tradition. Leadership that values not just the business, but the people who make it thrive. And it is with great pride that I stand before you today to introduce the new president of Prestige Hotels. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to freeze as the words hit the air. She could feel the eyes of everyone on her. But she was not prepared for the next part. Harrison turned, and with a flourish, he motioned for Abigail to step forward. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce you to Abigail Thompson, the new president of Prestige Hotels. A wave of gasps swept through the crowd as Abigail stood up, her legs shaking, her heart racing. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it. As she walked toward the podium, the weight of her family's expectations, their disapproval, and their rejection felt like a physical burden pressing down on her shoulders. She was no longer the daughter who had chosen the path of charity and modesty. She was now the woman who had risen from the depths of that life to become a leader in an industry they had always revered. As Abigail took the microphone, the room fell into a stunned silence. Her family's faces were frozen, their expressions a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and something else, regret. Perhaps. Her father, Richard, looked as though he had seen a ghost. His glass of whiskey trembled in his hand as he stared at her in shock. Margaret, her mother, appeared to be struggling to maintain her composure, her fan fluttering in nervousness. And Emily, Abigail's sister, sat frozen, her mouth slightly agape, her phone forgotten in her lap. The entire room was holding its breath, waiting for Abigail to speak. She took a deep breath and began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. I know this may come as a shock to many of you, she began, her eyes scanning the sea of faces before her. For the past 10 years, I have worked in the background, quietly learning and growing. My charitable work wasn't just about helping others, It was about gaining the experience and the knowledge I needed to lead. I've worked in every area of this hotel. From the front desk to housekeeping. From catering to guest services. I've been a part of this industry in ways that most people never see. I've learned the true meaning of leadership. And I am honored to step into this role. As she spoke, Abigail could feel the shift in the room. At first, the silence had been thick with disbelief. But now there was something else in the air, respect. Perhaps. Or even admiration. The applause that began to ripple through the crowd. Though tentative at first, soon grew louder. The staff, who had been standing at the back of the room, began to clap in earnest, their faces shining with pride. Abigail's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and triumph. She had done it. She had stepped into her own truth. And in doing so, she had not only surprised her family but also revealed the depth of her strength and determination. Her father's face had gone pale, and his hand was shaking as he put down his glass of whiskey. Margaret, too, looked like she had been struck by a sudden blow. Emily's face, however, was a study in shock and disbelief. She had always been the golden child, the one who received all the attention, the one who was always in the spotlight. But now, all eyes were on Abigail, and the reality of that change was crashing down on her sister. Abigail took a deep breath and continued, her voice growing stronger. I spent 10 years learning from the people who make this hotel what it is. I've listened to our guests, understood their needs, and worked side by side with our staff to ensure we are always improving. I stand here today not as someone who simply inherited this position, but as someone who has earned it. The applause grew louder, echoing through the ballroom. And Abigail felt a surge of pride. For the first time in a long while, she was not invisible. She was seen. She was heard. And she had claimed her place in the world. As the applause subsided, Abigail took a moment to absorb the overwhelming shift in the atmosphere. She could feel the eyes of the guests, the staff, and most importantly, her family, who were now faced with the reality of what had just unfolded. Her father's lips trembled, and her mother looked as if the world she had carefully built had begun to unravel. Emily, sitting at the main table, still seemed paralyzed, her phone abandoned at her side. For the first time, Abigail felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. This was no longer about proving herself to her family or the world. It was about living her truth. And that truth was powerful. Over the next few months, the family dynamics began to shift. Richard, once a pillar of unshakable pride, found himself questioning everything he had believed in. The downfall of his business and his disillusionment with the life he had built was hard to bear. But he knew, deep down, that Abigail's success was inevitable. Margaret, too, learned the hard lesson that social status was not the measure of a person's worth. Slowly, both she and Richard began to realize that Abigail had achieved what they never could: true fulfillment. Rooted in hard work and compassion, Emily, in her own way, also began to change. The fall of her social media empire was swift. But it was a necessary wake-up call. She visited Abigail's office one evening, tearfully asking how she had become so strong. Abigail embraced her sister, offering the kind of support she had always craved. A reminder that true strength came from within. Abigail knew the journey was far from over. The new chapter in her life had only just begun. But for the first time, she felt ready. The world was wide open, and it was hers to shape. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to follow more inspiring life stories.